It's now easier than ever to create your own website. The problem is that anyone else can do the same. How do you stand out in an industry that is getting more and more crowded? How do you ensure that your website really represents the uniqueness of your brand? In this video, I'm going to share some of my top design tips for how you can improve your website. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to do is talk about fonts. Having the right font really determines the mood of your site and sets a tone for what you're trying to say. It's important to think about the feeling that you're trying to evoke, and especially if you want people to trust what you have to say. Most AI tools tend to default to fonts like Inter. It's a clear, simple font that's easy to read. However, it's quite forgettable. When you're choosing a font, it's important to think about things like the feeling that you want people to have when reading it, and also how it represents your brand on a whole. The thing about being on brand is that it depends on what your site does and where you're positioning yourself. For example, a news website might use something editorial like Times New Roman, but a SaaS application might need something that's a bit more clear and futuristic. I really like the way that Google allows people to choose their font with different feelings like business, artistic, vintage, loud, happy, and awkward. And on the right-hand side here, I've got a selection of different fonts where you can see that they each have a different feel to them. The questions that you should ask yourself when looking through a font is, what kind of emotion does this font evoke? How does it represent your brand? How might it differ when you write in all caps? How big would it be on the page? Is it still legible? Would you like to go for something serif or sans serif? Do you want a thin font or a thick font? These are all things to consider when choosing a font. Some of the tips that I have for anyone trying to change their font is to have two fonts. Pair a serif font with a sans serif font for headings and copy. Think very carefully about line height and also paragraph spacing. You want to maximize the legibility and readability of your text. I would really recommend looking at Google Fonts if you want to view a wide selection of different fonts that you can integrate into your project. It's quite easy to download into your AI tool and have it deploy that across your site. If you want to go a step further, I'd really recommend to use Adobe fonts. They are much more characterful and the range of designs is much more varied. The next thing to consider is icons. Most AI tools will default to using icon libraries like Lucid. Lucid is a great icon library and they have thousands of different icons. However, the chances are that you only need a few. Generally speaking, there's two different types of icons: product icons and functional icons. Product icons are the ones that you might recognize from Google. They're quite large, they're very stylized, and they're usually used at one per page. Look at this image of Facebook Messenger and how they have one large icon in the middle of the page. Contrasting that with functional icons. Functional icons need to be sleek, they need to be very clean and also minimal, as they are usually paired with text and they need to be very easy to read. Functional icons are usually in a single color, and you can see a few examples here with the two bottom navigation bars in these apps. So at an early stage, it's really fine to use something like Lucid or even Material icons. But as your product progresses, I would recommend to hire an illustrator or find some kind of specific designer that you can hire to create some really on-brand icons. This is a little touch that can really help you go the extra mile when it comes to your brand and how you represent yourself. When it comes to copy and content, it's quite common to see AI used throughout people's websites. The issue that I've noticed is that it relies on a lot of common tropes. Things like, here's the thing, it's not this, it's this, which is known as binary comparison. The something is dead, or using em dashes in too many places at once, are very telltale signs of how copy is used without any thinking really. Regardless of your brand, if you prompt the AI to come up with copy, it will use the same tropes and lean on the same essential metaphors and also expressions that it's using everywhere else, because it's simply trained on the same data that everyone else has. To differentiate yourself, you really have to teach it how you want to represent yourself as a brand. I've got a great piece of advice that I found online from a content designer where she was saying, you have to answer these questions yourself and then give that to the AI so it knows what to write the copy around. Questions like, what do you stand for? Why did you start your business? What drives you? What makes your approach different from others in your field? If your brand was a person, how would people describe them? And what's the single most important thing that your audience should remember about your business? The thing about copy is that you need to be as minimal as possible. Most people aren't going to read everything on your website, so using as few words as possible really goes the extra mile. It can be tempting to use AI, but I would caution against using it for everything. Rather, use it as a foundation to just help you start from something that's more than a blank page. Always remember that you need to iterate and rework what the AI gives you. So the more you rework it, the more it sounds like you and the more it sounds human. Lastly, I want to share a few examples of where all of these AI tropes of what not to do are brought together in different people's websites. I've tried to anonymize them so nobody gets offended. However, I've got a few examples here which I think really show some telltale signs of AI. One of the common components that are used is the icon title paragraph loop. This is repeated 3 times across the page horizontally, and generally speaking, people won't read everything that you write in this case. What I would recommend to fix this is to have one central theme or one central argument in your page that tells a really compelling story of why somebody should buy your product or use your service. Having cards with a highlighted accent at the top or using different shades of the same color is a really obvious way that something is AI generated. It generally doesn't show a variation of the brand, and I would prefer if someone had more than one color for their brand. Have a look at some of these examples where we've got gradients, we've got things like the inter font being used throughout, and notice that most people would probably just skip right past most of the content here. That's because the more AI sites there are, people are just trained to not read them and just scroll through them. If you want to differentiate yourself, you have to focus on some of these aspects. There's no harm in using AI for your website, but my recommendation would be to start with a style guide or a color palette and then give that to the AI to draw from. Make sure that it operates only in these parameters and it's quite controlled, meaning that you can control the output. Again, iterate, rework, try things out, and test it again and again. These repeated tests will get things feeling like they're more aligned to what your brand should represent and will really help you in the long run. So that's what I'd recommend to anyone who's trying to build a website or product with AI. I'm definitely not cautioning against using AI. Just be a bit more judicious and try and be as creative as possible. If you want to start learning more about design, just lean on some of these design principles and keep iterating on what you're creating. Best of luck, and I'll see you in the next one.